500 guests, crystal chandeliers burning white above their heads. A pregnant woman in a champagne gold gown standing 8 feet from her husband as he leaned into the microphone and told the room she was worthless. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't move. But her father did. Richard Calloway, 64 years old, self-made billionaire, a man who had built a $4 billion empire from a second-hand guitar and an empty room in a Nashville warehouse, stood up from his seat at table 1. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He straightened his jacket, picked up the pocket watch from the tablecloth where he'd set it beside his water glass, slipped it into his breast pocket, and walked toward the stage with the calm of a man who had already decided how this ends. What he did next, no one in that ballroom will ever forget. But here's what Mason didn't know. His wife had already found the credit card statements. The hotel receipt 14 miles from their house on the night he said he was in Memphis. The forged signature on a $350,000 loan document. The file on his own laptop where he'd been logging her tears, her fears, her sleepless nights building a case to take their unborn daughter away from her. He thought he married a quiet woman. He married a Calloway. And Calloway women don't break. They transform. This is the story of a woman who was called worthless by the man who was supposed to love her most, and how she became the most valuable person in the room. Stay until the end because the moment her father speaks at that second gala will leave you speechless. The champagne flutes stopped clinking. 500 guests turned their heads in the same direction the way a field of grass bends when the wind decides. The string quartet, halfway through something light and elegant, trailed off one instrument at a time until there was nothing left but the hum of the chandeliers and the soft percussion of someone's nervous cough near the back of the room. Nora Calloway Holt stood near the edge of the stage, 7 months pregnant. Champagne gold gown that her mother had helped her choose 3 weeks ago, laughing in the fitting room, Elena holding up earrings and saying, "You look like a painting sweetheart." Diamond studs that had been in the family since before Nora was born. Her hand rested on her belly, not performing ease reaching for it. Mason was at the podium, her husband, the man who had kissed her cheek that morning while she was still half asleep and whispered, "You're beautiful into her hair." The man who had fixed his cufflinks in the bathroom mirror 2 hours ago and caught her watching him in the reflection and smiled warm, real the smile she fell in love with. Now he stood under the spotlight with a glass of bourbon and a grin that had wandered somewhere it had no business going. He'd been giving a toast. The annual tribute to the Calloway Foundation's charitable work, the kind of speech a devoted son-in-law gives when 500 donors are watching, the kind that's supposed to be gracious and warm and 20 minutes shorter than it is. Instead, Mason had drifted off script. "My wife," he said, swirling his bourbon. "Nora. She's a lot of things. Smart, sure. Dedicated, no question." He paused the way a man pauses when he wants the room to feel what's coming. "But let's be real for a second. Among friends." Another pause, a small chuckle. "Without her daddy's money, she'd be absolutely worthless." The word landed like a hand across a face, not a gasp. Something worse. Silence. The kind that happens when 500 people simultaneously hold their breath and find somewhere else to look, anywhere, except at the pregnant woman standing 8 feet from the podium with her hand on her belly and her face perfectly, terrifyingly still. Nora's fingers found the edge of the nearest table. Her knuckles whitened around the linen. The tablecloth was starched stiff white like everything else in this room that was about to come apart. A microphone squeal cut the air, thin, high, sharp, the sound system reacting before anyone else did. She looked across the ballroom, past the sea of evening gowns and tailored suits, past the ice sculptures and the flower arrangements and the silent, frozen faces. She found her father. Richard Calloway sat at table 164 years old, silver-haired, in a charcoal suit that had been made for him and fit accordingly. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. His napkin was still folded across his lap. His water glass was still in his right hand. His eyes were on Mason the way a man's eyes settle on something he has already decided to remove. That stillness. Nora had grown up watching it. She'd seen it in boardrooms when a partner tried to restructure a deal in bad faith. She'd seen it the time a developer tried to cut Richard out of a $30 million project using doctored contracts. She'd watched her father go perfectly, completely still and then make one move. One move that ended the other man's position entirely, without a raised voice, without a wasted word. He set his water glass down, slipped the pocket watch from the tablecloth into his breast pocket, that gesture, that specific gesture, and stood. The room tracked him the way rooms track men who know where they're going. Every step was deliberate. The sound of his leather shoes on the marble floor was the only sound in the entire ballroom. Clean measured final. Clean measured. Mason's smile faltered just slightly, just once like a signal flickering, and then recovered because Mason was the kind of man who always believed he could recover. Richard reached the stage, climbed 3 steps without breaking stride, stood beside his son-in-law. He was 2 inches shorter than Mason. He occupied twice the space. He reached out and gently, almost tenderly, took the microphone from Mason's hand. The way you take something sharp from someone who doesn't understand what they're holding. "My son-in-law," Richard said. His voice was warm, even conversational, as if he were sharing something interesting over coffee. "My son-in-law just called my daughter worthless." He let the word sit in the chandelier light. Let every person in that room feel the weight of it. Interesting word, from a man whose entire net worth fits comfortably in my coat pocket. A murmur moved through the crowd, not laughter, not outrage, something in between. The sound of 500 people recalibrating. Richard smiled. The smile that had built a $4.2 billion company from a second-hand guitar and a $25,000 loan in an empty warehouse off Nolansville Road. The smile that meant the conversation was already over, the other person just hadn't realized it. "But we'll discuss that privately," he continued, and his voice smoothed out again, warm, measured. "Tonight is about the children this foundation serves. Children who need access to the arts. Children who need someone to sit down beside them and say, 'You matter. Your voice matters. What you create matters.'" He reached into his jacket, drew out a personal checkbook, wrote without hesitating, held it up. $2.5 million tonight, additional, for the Callaway Arts Education Center expansion. The room erupted, 500 people on their feet. Applause crashing like a wave, breaking over everything, over Mason, over the microphone, over the word he'd just put into the air of a room full of people who would never forget it. Edmund Richard had redirected 500 people's attention in under 90 seconds. He handed the microphone to the event coordinator, nodded once, and walked back to his table. Mason stood on the stage alone, blinking. The spotlight above him, but not for him anymore. He had been publicly neutralized without Richard Callaway ever raising his voice. Nora didn't see the rest. She was already moving through the space between tables, past the waiters with their silver trays, past the women who dropped their eyes when she walked by, and the men who found their cufflinks suddenly fascinating. She found the bathroom on the other side of the lobby, pushed open the heavy oak door, walked past the marble sinks and the orchid arrangement and the basket of embroidered hand towels. She entered the last stall, turned the lock, and lowered herself to the cold tile floor in a $2,800 gown. Her hand found her belly. The baby kicked hard, certain like a fist against her palm. "Your daddy just called us worthless little one," Nora whispered, "in front of everyone we know." She didn't cry, not yet. The shock was too complete for tears. Tears require understanding. And Nora didn't understand anything right now except the cold tile under her legs, and the warm life moving under her hand, and the word worthless echoing in the cavity behind her ribs. She pulled out her phone, found his text from that morning, 8:47 a.m. A photo he'd taken of her sleeping, morning light on her face hair across the pillow. His caption, "Can't wait to show you off tonight." She read it 3 times. locked the screen, unlocked it, read it again. As if repetition might resolve the contradiction. As if the man who sent that text and the man at that podium were two different people, and she just had to locate the one she married. The baby kicked again. Nora closed her eyes, pressed her back against the stall wall, breathed. 3 minutes passed, maybe 5. Time runs differently when the ground drops out. She stood, smoothed her gown, checked her reflection over the marble sink, same face, same earrings, same woman who walked into this ballroom believing her husband loved her. She stepped into the lobby and stopped, 20 feet away near the coat check. Mason, his back to her, his hand low on the back of a woman Nora had never seen, blonde, maybe 28, in a black strapless dress, laughing at something he'd just said. Mason leaned in close, his lips near her ear. They didn't see Nora, but Nora saw everything. The hand on her back, not the shoulder, the lower back. The lean, the ease of it, the comfort in it, the history in it. That wasn't a colleague talking loudly at a loud event. That was the movement of two people who had touched each other before, many times. Nora stepped back into the shadow of the hallway, watched for 4 seconds. 5. Then she turned and walked away. Her heels made no sound on the carpet. The drive home was 11 minutes of silence, broken only by the rain that had started while they were inside. The windshield wipers beat their rhythm, and Nora sat with her hands folded over her belly and listened to the sound they made against the glass. Mason drove. Not quite sober, not quite drunk. Somewhere in between that some men call confident. "You're quiet," he said. Nora watched a streetlight catch a raindrop and turn it gold for a second before it slid away. "It was a joke, Nor." He sighed, that particular sigh, the one that made her feel like her feelings were a management problem. "The hormones have been making you—" Who was she? Not a question, a statement. Nora's voice was flat, calm, and the flatness surprised them both. Mason's hands tightened on the wheel, just slightly. Who was who? Blonde, black dress, your hand on her back by the coat check. A beat of silence. The wipers swept. "That's Paige. She's a junior associate. We were talking about the filing deadline." You were whispering in her ear. "It's a loud hallway, Nora. That's how—" He exhaled, shifted. "Can we not do this right now? You're 7 months pregnant. You should be—" His phone lit up in the cup holder between them. Nora saw the screen, one initial before Mason flipped it face down. P. "Your phone. Work thing. I'll deal with it." They pulled into the driveway of the townhouse she'd bought with her trust fund, the one Mason called ours when company came, and yours when they argued. He killed the engine, sat for a moment, then reached over and covered her hand with his. "I'll call your dad tomorrow and apologize. The bourbon made me stupid." His hand was warm. His eyes were soft. He looked exactly like the man she had married. And that was the most frightening thing in the world. Because the man she married wouldn't have said that word, wouldn't have touched another woman's back like that in a lobby full of people who knew his wife. The man she married might not have existed at all. "Okay," Nora said, because that was what she always said. He disappeared into the guest room. He'd been sleeping there for 3 months, claimed it was the snoring, claimed he didn't want to wake her. She'd believed it. Nora stood alone in the kitchen. The house pressed its silence against her ears. She walked to Mason's home office. The door was ajar. His desk was always meticulous. Pens aligned, papers stacked, laptop centered. The desk of a man who controls his environment because he can't control anything else. The top drawer opened easily. Chargers, sticky notes, a spare set of keys. The second drawer didn't. She went to the coat closet, found his jacket from tonight. In the inside pocket, a small flat key she'd never seen before. Back in the office. Key in the lock. Click. Inside, credit card statements. Not their shared card. A card she'd never seen in his name alone. Nora carried them to the kitchen table and spread them under the overhead light. Dinners for two. Every restaurant he'd told her was a client dinner. Margot, the Oak Room, Locanda Verde, December. Every entry 2 covers. A jewelry store receipt. $5,800. A necklace. Nora touched her bare throat. She had never received a necklace. And at the bottom of the stack, a hotel charge. The Adelaide Inn, December 9th. The night Mason had told her he was in Memphis for a deposition. She pulled up the hotel's address on her phone, 14 miles from their house. He hadn't gone to Memphis. He had driven 14 miles and invented 300. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the table edge, lowered herself into a chair. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw tonight, and now I know what I've been missing for months. The signs were all there. The late nights, the new cologne, the way he angled his phone away, the way he stopped reaching for me. I wasn't paranoid. I was trusting him. Those are not the same thing. The baby shifted inside her, a slow roll left to right. Nora picked up her phone. 1:22 a.m. She dialed Jade. 1 ring. 2. Nor. Jade's voice groggy but instantly alert. Best friends answer at 100 in the morning. That's the unwritten rule, the unspoken contract that separates real friendship from everything else. I found something, Nora said. She was surprised by how even her voice was. Credit card statements. A hotel 14 miles from here the night he said he was in Memphis. Dinners for 2 at every restaurant he told me was work. A necklace I never got. Silence. Jade. More silence. And then a breath. Long shaking. The kind of breath you take before you say something that will change things. I didn't know for certain, Jade said. Her voice cracked on the last word. But I saw them together 2 months ago. At the Oak Room, a corner table. His hand was in hers. I left before they noticed. I walked 3 blocks and I couldn't. She stopped. I was going to tell you. I kept waiting for the right. Nora set the phone face down on the table. She sat in the kitchen of the house she'd bought at the table where she'd told Mason she was pregnant, wearing the gown she'd chosen for a night that was supposed to celebrate her father's life's work. 2 months. Jade had known for 2 months, and the credit card statements went back 20 months. 2 betrayals in one night. Her husband, her closest friend. Nora looked down at her belly. The baby was quiet now, sleeping, maybe unaware that the architecture of her world was being redesigned in the dark. She pressed her palms flat on the table, felt the grain of the wood beneath her fingers. Solid, real, something she could trust. Okay, she whispered to no one. She didn't know yet what the word meant, but she said it. Because sometimes okay isn't a statement of fact. It's a decision to keep breathing when every instinct is telling you to stop. Morning arrived the way mornings do after sleepless nights. Not gradually. Just all at once, the kitchen flooding with gray light, and Nora still at the table, the credit card statement spread in front of her and her coffee cold in the mug. She heard Mason on the stairs. The 3rd step creaked, the slide of slippers on hardwood. He appeared in the doorway in a t-shirt and sweats. Rubbed his eyes, poured himself coffee without noticing hers hadn't been touched. I was thinking brunch at the club, he said. Weather's supposed to clear up. Nora looked at him. She studied his face the way you study a painting you've just discovered is a forgery. The brushwork looks right. The colors are correct. But once you really look, you can see exactly where the technique falls short, where the truth lives in the details waiting to be found. Sure, she said. Brunch sounds nice. She swept the statements off the table and into her purse while he was looking out the window. He kissed the top of her head on his way to shower, a habit muscle memory, not love. She could feel the difference now. She drove to her parents' estate after brunch. The Callaway property sat on 22 acres outside Franklin. Limestone walls, black iron gates, a half-mile drive lined with black-eyed Susans that Elena had planted herself 20 years ago and still tended every spring. Nora had grown up on this land, had fallen off her bicycle on this gravel, had run to her father with a scraped knee and heard him say, "Callaway women fall down, sweetheart." Then they get back up. She let herself in through the kitchen door. The house smelled like fresh cornbread. Elena baked when she was worried. Cornbread meant she was very worried. Richard was in his study. The room was exactly as it had always been. Wide mahogany desk, built-in shelves, floor to ceiling, a leather chair that had memorized the shape of his body over 40 years of late-night reading. A framed photo on the wall of a man in a recording studio 23 years old holding a guitar and looking at something off-camera with absolute certainty. Richard had never taken it down. To remember where I started, he'd told Nora once. So I never start believing I'm someone who was always this. He set down his reading glasses when she walked in. Said nothing. He already knew why she was there. She sat across from him in the worn leather chair, the one she'd been sitting in since she was 4 years old. Her feet used to dangle. Now they touched the floor, but the feeling was identical. Safety. The smell of old paper and cedar. She placed the credit card statements on the desk. Richard put his glasses back on. Read each one slowly, methodically, the way he read contracts, the way he read anything that mattered. His face was stone. When he finished, he folded his glasses, set them on the desk, aligned them with the edge. What do you want to do? Not what he would do. Not what she should do. What she wanted to do. That was how he had always raised her. Make your own choices. Own your own decisions. He gave her the tools and the space, and then he waited even now, even when every instinct must have been telling him to pick up the phone and end this in 5 minutes. I don't know yet, Nora said. He nodded. Take your time. Outside, Elena's gardener was trimming the hedges. The sound of it, clean, rhythmic, ordinary, filled the study like a metronome. Nora closed her eyes. Let herself be 4 years old again just for a minute. He's been cheating, she said. At least 20 months, maybe longer. I know, Richard said quietly. Nora opened her eyes. You know, I suspected after last night. I made a call this morning. He paused. A man who calls his pregnant daughter-in-law worthless in a room full of witnesses has something larger to hide. That kind of cruelty doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's always covering something. He set down his glasses. I'm sorry, I was right. Elena found Nora in the garden an hour later. They walked the grounds together, mother and daughter shoes crunching on the gravel path, the September air smelling like dried grass, and something cool just beginning to come in from the north. Elena didn't offer advice. She told a story. 28 years ago, Elena said, your father had a business partner, Glenn Forrest. They built their first real estate project together, a strip of commercial properties in Murfreesboro. 60-40 split Glenn's terms. 2 years in, your father found out Glenn had been redirecting income. Not a lot, maybe 4% per quarter. But over time, it had added up to almost $3 million. Nora listened. The gravel crunched. Your father didn't confront him, Elena continued. Didn't call a lawyer right away, didn't raise his voice. He went quiet for 8 weeks. He gathered every document traced. Every transfer built a case so complete that when he finally sat, Glenn down, there was nothing left to argue, nothing to deny, nothing to negotiate. Glenn signed over his equity stake that same afternoon. Elena stopped walking, turned to face her daughter. Your father doesn't get angry, Nora. He gets surgical. And he taught you to do the same. Nora returned home at 4 in the afternoon. The house was quiet. Mason was at the gym or wherever he actually went. His phone was on the kitchen counter charging face up. It buzzed. A text from PS. The screen lit. Nora read the notification before Mason's name could process in her mind. Last night was too close. She almost came back through the lobby. We need to be smarter. Missing you already. Nora's throat tightened, but her hands didn't shake. Something had shifted. Somewhere between the cold bathroom tile last night and her father's study this morning, the grief had begun to harden into something colder, clearer. Not rage, something more precise than rage. The beginning of a plan that didn't have words yet, but already had direction. She photographed the text. Scrolled through his conversation with P.S. Paige Sutton. The name filled itself in as she scrolled dozens of messages, months of them, pet names and plans and promises Nora had never been offered. She photographed everything. Then she opened his email and found something far worse than an affair. Garrett Mason had been in contact with a divorce attorney, Marcus Webb, specializing in high-net-worth separations. 6 months of emails, meticulous, calculated, cold, regarding prenatal custody strategy, Callaway trust structure and community property applicability, documenting spousal instability for preemptive custody filing. Mason wasn't just cheating, he was planning to leave her, but not before securing every claim he could make to Callaway family wealth through the baby. Custody leverage, paternal rights, financial arguments. Every email was deliberate. Every email was the opposite of love. Nora set the phone down at exactly the angle she'd found it, wiped her fingerprints with her sleeve, heard the shower start upstairs. Mason was home. She hadn't heard him come in. She sat down at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and waited for him to come downstairs so she could smile at him across the dinner she was going to cook. Because the most dangerous thing a woman can do when she discovers the truth is pretend she hasn't. If you're feeling this story in your chest right now, hit that subscribe button. We bring you stories like this every week. The forensic accountant's name was Carol Marsh. 55, silver-streaked hair, the kind of woman who had spent 3 decades finding money that men had carefully buried. She sat across from Nora and Richard in Daniel Rourke's law office on a Tuesday morning, 5 days after the gala. Your husband has been systematic, Carol said. She laid spreadsheets across the conference table, color-coded, annotated, exact. Over the past 20 months, he's made 127 separate transfers from your joint household account to a personal account you're not named on. Each transfer was under $2,000, specifically designed to stay below bank alert thresholds. The total is $94,000. Nora stared at the numbers, each one a dinner she'd thought was real, a weekend she'd thought was theirs, a life she'd thought they were building together. But that's not the worst of it, Carol said. She slid another document across the table. Daniel leaned forward. 6 months ago, your husband took a loan of $350,000 from a man named Randall Price. Price operates on the legal fringe predatory lending structure's exploitative terms, enforcement methods that have drawn multiple federal investigations. His interest rates are designed to guarantee default. Nora looked at the loan paperwork, the highlighted section. Expected inheritance through marriage. Callaway family assets. Co-guarantor Nora Callaway Holt. She read the line, then read it again. Her family's wealth. Her father's 40 years of work reduced to collateral on a debt she hadn't known existed. Carol wasn't finished. There's a co-guarantee form attached. It bears your signature, Nora. Carol slid it across. Nora looked at her name, her handwriting almost. The N was right. The C was wrong. She always rounded her C, always. It was one of those handwriting habits that went back to 3rd grade. She'd never changed it. This one was angular, sharp, close enough to fool a lender who wasn't scrutinizing, not close enough to fool the woman whose name it was. I didn't sign this, Nora said. We know, Daniel replied. That's forgery. Federal offense. Nora stood, walked to the window, looked down at the street 14 floors below, people walking to lunch, checking phones, carrying bags, the ordinary business of a normal day. He wasn't just cheating. He was engineering her destruction. She'd found the behavior log on his laptop later that same week, a folder labeled NKH Notes, dates and entries going back 8 months. Every time she'd cried because something felt wrong documented. Every sleepless night, every anxious question, every moment of ordinary pregnant emotion taken and reframed as instability. He'd been manufacturing a record of her as unfit, emotionally erratic, a risk. Every argument she'd started because her gut was screaming at her. Every time he'd said, "You're being irrational," nor he was writing it down, he was making her look unstable. And she had been handing him the material without knowing she was doing it. "What do we do?" Nora said. Not a question, a command. Richard, who had been silent throughout the entire presentation, picked up each document and read it a second time. Then he took out his phone and made 3 calls. The first to Daniel, file everything, divorce, asset protection, criminal referral. The second to Carol, trace Price's full operation, every entity, every connection. The third, he stepped out of the room. When he came back, his expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had sharpened. The look of a man who has identified the problem and already designed the solution. "He made one mistake," Richard said. "He forgot whose daughter you are." That evening, Nora called Travis Holt, Mason's father, the call she'd been dreading most. Travis picked up on the second ring. His voice was rough. Harlan County, Kentucky, 40 years of honest work in a hardware store he'd built from a single rented space on Main Street. He asked about the baby in every phone call, sent cards that arrived on the actual birthday, called Nora sweetheart, and meant it every single time. "I need to ask you something," Nora said. "And I need you to be straight with me, Travis." "Always, sweetheart. Always." "Did you know about Mason and the woman from his office?" A long pause. She heard him set something down. A coffee mug, maybe. "I didn't know it had gone this far." His voice cracked on far. "He brought her by the store last spring. Introduced her as a colleague, Paige. Pretty girl, young. The way she looked at him, I recognized it. Same look his mother used to give men she wasn't supposed to." He paused, cleared his throat. "I raised him better than this, or I tried to. His mother left when he was 8. Just gone one Saturday morning, said she was going to get groceries, never came back. I raised him alone, worked doubles, drove him everywhere. I thought he'd come out of it okay." "Travis, I'm so sorry, Nora. I am so deeply sorry my son did this to you. You deserved better. That baby deserves better." The thought arrived without invitation, clean and bright. "I know that. I have always known that." She thanked Travis and hung up, sat in the quiet of her living room, and made a decision. She wouldn't confront Mason, not yet, not until everything was in position. She would be the wife he expected, warm, unsuspecting, grateful. She would watch him relax, watch him think he'd already won. That night at dinner, she laughed at his story about a coworker passed him the breadbasket, asked about his week. The whole time she was memorizing him, not the way a wife memorizes a husband, but the way a detective memorizes a subject. The tells, the micro-expressions, the way his eyes moved slightly left when he was constructing something. He was her opponent now, and Nora Calloway had been raised by the best strategist she'd ever known. 3 days later, Jade showed up at the front door. Mascara running, hair damp from rain she hadn't bothered to shelter from, hands shaking. "I need to tell you everything," she said. "All of it. Even the parts I'm ashamed of." Nora opened the door wider. They sat on the kitchen floor, 2 grown women on cold tile, Jade with ruined mascara, Nora with her belly between her crossed legs. The refrigerator hummed. The ice maker dropped its load. The mundane percussion of a life still running while everything inside it burned. "Start from the beginning," Nora said. Jade wiped her nose with her sleeve, a gesture too raw for her usual polished composure. She planned galas for Nashville's elite. She wore structured blazers and spoke in precise sentences and did not sit on kitchen floors with her mascara destroyed. But grief. Nora was learning strips away everything decorative. 2 months ago, Jade said. The Oak Room. I was meeting a client early sitting at the bar waiting, and I saw them. Mason and this woman at a table near the window. His hand in hers, not on top of hers, in hers. Fingers threaded. The way you hold someone you've held before. She swallowed. He pushed her hair behind her ear. She looked at him the way you used to look at him. In the beginning. Before. What did you do? Left before they saw me. Walked 4 blocks. Threw up behind a coffee shop. Went home and sat in my car for an hour. She looked at the tile between her knees. And then, I did nothing. The word nothing landed like a stone between them. He came to see me the next day, at my office, calm, charming, full of regret. Said he'd seen me see them. Said it was already ending. Said you were fragile with the pregnancy, and the stress of knowing would put the baby at risk. He begged me to wait. Said he'd cut it off by the end of the week. She exhaled. And I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was sitting across from you at brunch and watching your face change. So I waited 1 more week, and then another week. 2 months of weeks, Nor. 2 months of brunch and baby showers and your shower in July sitting across from you at your own table knowing. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I called it protecting you, but I was protecting myself. From this look on your face right now. Nora stared at the grout lines between the tiles, thin gray, slightly uneven. You're right, she said finally. I don't know if I'll trust you the way I did. Maybe I won't for a long time. But I need to know everything you know. Not for the marriage, for the fight. Jade looked up. The fight. He's not just cheating Jade. He's planning to take my money, my reputation, and my daughter. I need to know everything about Paige Sutton before I can stop him. Something shifted in Jade's expression. The guilt didn't leave, but it made room for something else. Purpose. The particular energy of someone who has been given a chance to make things right and intends to take it with both hands. Jade went to work. She knew everyone. She knew which bartenders remembered which couples. She knew which assistants at Mason's firm had opinions about the junior associates. She had Paige Sutton's full picture within 48 hours. 29 years old. Ambitious. Had told 3 different people at 2 different after-work gatherings that she'd be Mrs. Holt before next summer. Had been posting photos from restaurants Mason took her to, never showing his face, always framing the champagne, the view, the candlelight. A curated record of someone else's husband. She had no idea about the Callaway trust structure. She thinks marrying Mason gives her access to your family's assets, Jade said, reading from her notes. She doesn't understand irrevocable trusts. She doesn't understand that the Callaway holdings are structured in a way Mason has 0 legal claim to. She thinks she's marrying into hundreds of millions. She's marrying into debt and a federal indictment. Nora almost laughed. Almost. The intelligence that mattered most came the following Thursday. Daniel called Nora and Richard to his office. Carol had finished the full trace. The $94,000 from the joint account confirmed, Daniel said. But here's the development. He spread documents across the conference table. Randall Price isn't a random predatory lender who happened to find Mason. He runs a targeted operation. He identifies men who are over-leveraged, married into significant wealth, and financially desperate. He loans them money he knows they'll default on and then uses the forged co-guarantee documents to pursue claims against the family assets. Richard's hand stopped on the way to his coffee cup. He's done this to 9 other families, Daniel continued. 3 settled quietly. 6 are still in litigation. The forged document is the mechanism it creates just enough legal ambiguity to force costly settlements. Mason wasn't a random target. Price approached him specifically because of the Calloway name. Nora processed this. Mason wasn't just a cheating husband who'd gotten greedy. He was a mark, a tool in a larger operation. He'd been too vain and too careless to see that someone else was using him, and he'd dragged her family into it while he was busy not seeing it. $94,000 stolen. $350,000 borrowed from a predator. Her family's name put up as collateral. Their daughter's future leveraged against a loan from a man who specialized in destroying exactly this kind of family. She felt the anger crystallize, not hot, not frantic. Cold, diamond-dense, and absolutely clear. The kind of anger that doesn't swing wild. The kind that aims. Richard spoke for the first time in 40 minutes. Daniel criminal referral filed within 72 hours. Price's organization flagged with financial crimes. Nora's assets transferred into a prenatal trust for the baby by close of business Friday. He looked at Nora. I have a plan. One move. The right moment. I need you to be patient. What is it? He smiled. Not warmth. Strategy. The smile that had built $4 billion from a second-hand guitar and a $25,000 loan. The best deals close when the other side thinks they've already won. Mason thinks he's winning. Let's make sure he keeps thinking that for exactly 3 more weeks. Nora drove home in silence. No radio. Just the engine and her own breathing and her hand on the wheel and the calendar alert that had just appeared on her screen. OB appointment. Dr. Patricia Holloway tomorrow, 10 a.m. She'd almost forgotten in the avalanche of credit card statements and forensic accountants and layers of betrayal that she was growing a person. A person who knew nothing about any of this. A person who needed her to eat and rest and keep her blood pressure stable. She pressed her hand to her belly. The baby kicked, hard, insistent. I know, baby girl, she whispered. Mama's working on it. Dr. Patricia Holloway had delivered over 2,000 babies in 18 years. She had steady hands and the particular calm of someone who has seen every version of fear and never once lost her footing. So when she frowned at the blood pressure reading, Nora knew without being told. 162/99, the nurse read. Dr. Holloway removed the cuff, folded her hands, looked at Nora with an expression that was equal parts clinical and personal. She had been Nora's doctor through 2 miscarriages, through 2 years of trying through the day they finally saw 2 lines on a test. Nora, your blood pressure is dangerously high. At 7 months, this is a significant risk for preeclampsia. If this persists, we're looking at early delivery, complications for both of you. She paused. Whatever is causing the stress in your life right now, your body is keeping score. Stress hormones cross the placenta. Your baby feels what you feel. I need you to remove the source or I will be delivering this baby 8 weeks early in a surgical suite. Mason was in the waiting room. He had insisted on coming playing the part. When Dr. Holloway delivered the news, he performed concern with practiced precision. Held Nora's hand, asked about monitoring schedules, said we and our baby and whatever it takes. In the car, his phone rang. He answered it in front of her. Hey, yeah, no, I'm with Nora doctor's appointment. Everything's fine. A laugh. Maybe tonight. Let me see. He hung up. Noticed her watching. Work, he said. Client thing. Might need to go out later. Nora turned and looked out the window. The city slid by. The hardest part isn't what he's doing, it's watching him perform concern. The betrayal is at least honest in its own horrible way. The performance is just another lie laid on top of all the others, and I'm supposed to sit here and smile. She smiled. She was getting very good at it. 3 days later, at 11 at night, Mason was working late. Nora stood alone in the nursery. Pale yellow walls, a white crib with a mobile of silver stars that turned slowly in the draft from the vent, a rocking chair by the window she'd found it at an antique shop in Leiper's Fork and had it reupholstered in natural linen, a stuffed bear on the changing table, gray and soft, that she'd bought the day she finally saw 2 lines. She lowered herself into the rocking chair. It creaked under her weight. "I wanted you to have everything," she whispered to her belly. 2 parents who loved each other. Sunday mornings with nowhere to be. A father who carries you on his shoulders at the county fair and lets you think you're taller than everyone. Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, little one. I'm sorry She stopped, pressed her lips together. "No." She said it aloud, firm. "No." That's his voice, not mine. I didn't choose wrong because I loved someone. He chose wrong because he didn't. I am enough. I have always been enough. He is the one who isn't. The rocking chair creaked. The stars turned. Moonlight came through the curtains and striped the carpet in silver. Nora sat in that chair for a long time. An hour, maybe 2. She didn't reach for her phone, didn't search for answers she already had. She just sat and rocked and breathed and let the room hold her. At 2:14 in the morning, a deep tightening across her abdomen. She gasped, gripped the armrests. Another, stronger. She grabbed her phone, called Mason. Ring. 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 Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. She called Richard. He answered before the first ring finished. "Daddy?" She hadn't used that word in years. "Something's happening. Contractions. I can't reach Mason." "I'm leaving right now. Call Dr. Holloway. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Richard and Elena arrived in 19. They drove her to the hospital. Elena held her hand in the back seat, squeezing gently with each contraction. "Breathe, sweetheart. In and out. You're doing beautifully. The monitors. The IV. The baby's heartbeat on the screen, fast, steady, strong." Nora watched it flicker and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Gratitude. Simple, uncomplicated gratitude for the sound of a heartbeat. Braxton Hicks. Dr. Holloway confirmed after 40 minutes. Not true labor. But Nora's blood pressure had spiked to 164. "I'm not going to soften this," Dr. Holloway said. "Whatever is happening in your life stops today. Your body cannot maintain this pregnancy safely if this continues." Elena sat beside the hospital bed and smoothed Nora's hair. Long, slow strokes the way she had when Nora was 7 and had the flu when she was 14, and came home crying because a girl at school called her spoiled when she was 24 and failed her first major grant application for the foundation. Neither of them spoke. 2 heartbeats on the monitor, Nora's and the baby's, steady, strong, despite everything still beating. In the hallway through the cracked door, Richard's voice, low, measured certain. "Move the timeline up, Daniel. I want everything ready in 2 weeks. Mason arrived at 4:08 in the morning. His hair was slightly damp. His shirt was buttoned wrong, the 3rd button in the 4th hole. He smelled like something floral and sharp. Nora knew the scent without trying to. She'd noticed it on his collar before, told herself it was fabric softener. It was not fabric softener. "Babe, I'm so sorry. My phone died. I was at the office, the charger." "It's okay," Nora said. She let him hold her hand, let him press his lips to her temple, let him believe every word of it. The perfume hung in the air between them like a ghost neither of them was acknowledging. Leave a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Was it Richard taking the microphone, Travis Holt driving 16 hours, or the letter to her daughter? 4 days later, a padded envelope arrived at the house. No return address. Inside photographs. Mason and Paige at restaurants in a car entering a hotel, 14 months of documentation. Time-stamped. Unmistakable. irrefutable. At the bottom of the stack, a typed note on plain white paper. He doesn't deserve you. Everything you need is in here. Nora spread the photographs on the kitchen table, studied her husband's face in each frame, relaxed, happy, the face of a man living a life she wasn't part of. She turned the note over. Blank. Who had sent this, Daniel called her 3 days later. We traced the source. The photographer is a licensed PI out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. His client paid partly in cash and partly by personal check. The checks were drawn on an account belonging to Travis Ray Holt. Nora set her tea down slowly. Travis, Mason's father. A man who ran a hardware store in Harlan County and probably cleared $58,000 in a good year, who wore flannel shirts and polished his boots on Sundays, who had spent his retirement savings money he'd been setting aside for a new piece of equipment he needed for the store to document his own son's betrayal. To protect a daughter-in-law he'd met 7 times. Because it was the right thing to do. She called him that evening, sitting on the porch in the October air. The maple in the yard had started turning, green at the center, gold at the edges. I got your photographs, Travis. Silence. Then a sound she hadn't expected, a grown man crying. Quiet. The way men of a certain generation cry, reluctant, suppressed, ashamed of the tears even as they fall. I raised him better than this, Travis said. Or I tried to. His mother left when he was 8. I worked doubles for 3 years to keep us in that house. I drove him to every practice, sat in the front row for every game, thought I got through to him. He cleared his throat. When he brought that girl to the store last spring and introduced her as a colleague, I knew. I looked at him and I saw his mother. Same ease with lying, same ability to look someone who loves them straight in the eye and do them harm. Travis, you didn't have to. I used the money I'd been saving for a new table saw. His voice steadied. Don't need a table saw. Needed my conscience clear. If you need me to testify, I will. In court. Under oath. Against my own son. For my grandchild. Nora pressed her palm to her chest, felt her heartbeat against it. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Someone had to be the man my son decided not to be. The next morning, Nora went to her closet not to get dressed, to excavate. Hanger by hanger, pile by pile. The cocktail dresses Mason had chosen because they showed the right amount. Nor these are important people. Gone. The structured blazers he'd said made her look impressive. Impressive, meaning impressive to him, to his partners, to the image he was building. Gone. The silk blouse that cost $900 and made her feel like she was wearing someone else's personality. Gone. 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 Keep the oversized cashmere Mason had called shapeless. Keep the jeans he'd said made her look like she'd given up. Keep every single thing that had ever made her feel like herself. By the time she finished, 3 bags sat by the door. Her closet was half empty. But for the first time, every item left belonged to her. That afternoon, she went to the Callaway Arts and Education Foundation office. She hadn't been there in months. Mason had discouraged it. You need to rest, nor the foundation can survive without you. Another way to make her smaller, to separate her from the work that made her feel like herself. She arrived at the 14th floor of a glass tower on Broadway and stood in the lobby looking at the wall of children's artwork from the literacy and arts programs she'd built. Crayon drawings, watercolors, handwritten stories, 3 years of work made visible. Seth Wren met her in the lobby. Quiet eyes, 38 calm in a way that didn't come from effort. Some people are just built that way. They enter a room and the room doesn't change its temperature. He ran the foundation's daily operations and had been doing it well in her absence. Your father said you might come by, he said, and smiled. Not performance, just warmth. He handed her a coffee, almond milk, 1 sugar. Such a small thing. But after months of Mason not remembering, not caring, not noticing, it hit somewhere tender. "For what it's worth," Seth said as they walked to her office, "the impact numbers from last year are the best we've ever had. I think that's mostly because of the program framework you built before you left." Nora sat at her desk, opened the reports. 3,800 children reached through the literacy and arts programs she'd designed. 14 new school partnerships. A 93% participant satisfaction rate from the family surveys. She was not worthless. She had never been worthless. The word was so small, so fragile. It dissolved under the weight of 3,800 children who had access to something beautiful because of a program she'd built. 2 days before the gala, Mason's corporate credit card was declined at lunch. Jade had been monitoring his schedule and happened to be dining 2 tables away. She reported back by text. He tried 4 times. Then he excused himself. Page covered the check. His face. Nor. I wish you could have seen his face. Mason came home that evening restless. He checked his phone, opened his laptop, closed it, poured himself bourbon. "Everything okay?" Nora asked from the kitchen, her voice gentle. "Bank thing, security review, routine." He waved it off. "I'm sure it's nothing," Nora said. She dried a dish and set it in the cabinet, aligned it with the others. "Are you excited about Saturday? Daddy's been planning something special for the gala." He relaxed visibly, measurably. "Yeah, should be a good night." Nora smiled, set down the dish towel. "It will be." The night before the gala, Nora stood at her bathroom mirror. 8 months pregnant, dark circles that no concealer could fully address, hair she hadn't styled in weeks, hands slightly swollen, feet that ached by noon. She looked at herself. Really looked. Not through Mason's eyes, the ones that saw a fortune to leverage a reputation to weaponize a woman to diminish. Not through the eyes of a room full of people who measured worth in dress size and dinner party performance. Through her own eyes. "There you are," she whispered. "I've been looking for you." The woman in the mirror didn't look worthless. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and discovered she was made of something that doesn't burn. She went to the nursery, sat in the rocking chair, took out a sheet of cream stationery and a pen. Not a text, not an email ink on paper, because some things need to be written by hand, and she wrote. The pen scratched. The nursery was quiet. Moonlight came through the curtain and painted strips of silver across the carpet. "Dear little one, by the time you read this, you'll know some version of this story. The version I tell you will leave out the worst parts and keep the best ones. That's not dishonesty. That's motherhood." She wrote for 3 pages, about strength, about the difference between being loved and being owned, about what Callaway women are made of. Not money, not name, but spine. She folded the letter into thirds, tucked it into the pocket of the stuffed bear on the changing table. The gray one, the soft one, the one she'd bought the day she saw 2 lines. "Someday I'll read this to you," she whispered. "And you'll know your mama was brave, even when she wasn't sure she was. Especially then." Gala morning. 3 dresses laid out on the bed. 2 were Mason's choices, structured, designer chosen to display her like a prize at an exhibition. The 3rd was the one she and Elena had found together 2 weeks ago. Ivory. Floor length. Empire waist that draped over her belly like water finding its natural shape. Quiet and powerful and completely, entirely hers. She chose the 3rd. Elena arrived to help her dress. She fastened a delicate strand of diamonds around Nora's throat. Small stones that caught the light like scattered sparks. "This was my grandmother's," Elena said. "She wore it the day she left a man who spent 10 years making her feel small. She wore it to remind herself of what she was walking toward." She caught Nora's eyes in the mirror. "Callaway women don't break, sweetheart. We transform." The Union Grand Hotel's pinnacle ballroom. 600 guests. Crystal chandeliers. White garden roses on every table. a string quartet. The same room where 4 weeks ago Mason had stood at a podium with a bourbon in his hand and a grin and a word that had landed like a slap. Nora walked in at 6:45 with her head up and her hand on her belly. The baby kicked twice sharp definitive. I know. Me too. Richard was near the podium reviewing notes with the event coordinator in his charcoal suit, his silver hair the pocket watch visible at the edge of his breast pocket. He looked up when Nora entered. Their eyes met across the ballroom. He nodded just once, just barely. Daniel Rourke sat at the head table looking like any other guest except for the leather briefcase at his feet and the phone open in his hand. Jade was near the bar dressed in midnight blue watching the entrance. Through the service door slightly ajar, a man in a dark suit waited with professional patience, a folded document in his inside pocket. Mason arrived at 7:10. Paige Sutton walked in 6 minutes later, seated at a different table, but close enough to catch his eye. He wore his best suit, his most confident smile. He had absolutely no idea this was the last night of his old life. He walked to Nora, kissed her cheek, rested his hand on her belly for the photographer. "You look incredible," he said. And for a moment, one strange, aching moment, it sounded almost real. As if something buried deep beneath the lies and the schemes and the forged signatures remembered briefly what it had once felt like to mean it. "Thank you," Nora said. "It's going to be a remarkable night." The ballroom was full by 7:30. 600 people, Crystal catching candlelight, the hum of a room full of old money and new ambition conversation and champagne and silk. Richard took the stage at 7:45. He adjusted the microphone, surveyed the room. 600 faces looking up at him. Donors, executives, musicians, city officials, people who wrote checks with many zeros, people whose opinions built and erased reputations. He had addressed rooms like this for 30 years. They still went quiet when he spoke. He talked about the foundation's work, the numbers, the children. A 7-year-old girl who had her first piano lesson through the foundation's Arts Access program and was now performing at her school's winter concert. A 9-year-old boy who had learned to read at 6, 3 years behind and just won his school's creative writing prize. A teenager who received arts therapy after a family crisis because the foundation covered what insurance wouldn't classify as medically necessary, but what Dr. Holloway would have called, without hesitation, essential. Charlotte Nora watched from the head table. Mason's hand was on her knee. Not affection. Possession. The hand of a man who has something and wants the room to know. Richard paused, set down his notes, removed his reading glasses, folded them, slipped them into his breast pocket. The room felt the shift. When Richard Calloway set down his notes, something was about to happen. "Before we continue," he said, "I'd like to share something personal." 500 people leaned in. "Most of you know my daughter Nora. Some of you have known her since she was a child. You've watched her design the Foundation's literacy and arts program from an idea into a national model. You've watched her raise over $500,000 in independent fundraising last year. You've watched her show up even during the hardest months of her life because she believed in this work more than she believed in her own comfort." Nora's breath caught. Her fingers tightened on the tablecloth. "Nora chose to marry for love," Richard continued. "Not for dynasty, not for strategy, for love. I respected that choice. Even when I watched the man she chose slowly, methodically, make her smaller in ways that only a father watching closely would notice." Mason's hand went rigid on her knee. Richard's eyes crossed the ballroom and found his son-in-law. Found him and held him the way a spotlight holds an actor who has just forgotten every line. 4 weeks ago, in this room at this event, my son-in-law stood at this podium and called my daughter worthless. The murmur that moved through the crowd was sharp, involuntary, collective, the sound of 500 people reacting to something that cut. Worthless. Richard said the word again. Let it sit in the chandelier light. "Let me show you what worthless actually looks like," He touched the podium. The large projection screen behind him flickered on. Worthless is forging your pregnant wife's signature on a $350,000 loan from a predatory lender. The forged co-guarantee filled the screen. Nora's name. The angular initial that wasn't hers. The handwriting analyst's annotation in red. Mason stood. His chair scraped the floor, a sound like a blade on glass, cutting through the silence. Now Richard continued as if Mason hadn't made a sound. Worthless is systematically transferring $94,000 from your joint household account, 127 transactions, each one small enough to avoid triggering alerts, each one while your wife carries your child. The spreadsheet, the dates, the bank stamps, the arithmetic of 20 months of theft, laid out in clean columns for 600 people to read. The room had gone completely still. Not the polite silence of attention, the heavy silence of 500 people watching a man be taken apart by the truth he thought he'd buried. Worthless, Richard said, and his voice dropped quieter now, more devastating for its softness. Is documenting your pregnant wife's emotional responses during one of the most vulnerable periods of her life, calling her unstable, calling her irrational, manufacturing a record of her as an unfit mother to use against her in a custody fight over a child she's been carrying alone. The behavior log appeared on the screen. Mason's own words, his own dates, Charlotte's Nora's tears and sleepless nights, and ordinary human fear annotated and categorized. Every intimacy weaponized. Nora looked at Mason. His face had gone white in stages, pink to cream to gray. His mouth was open. His hands hung at his sides as if he'd forgotten how to use them. And worthless, Richard said, straightening to his full height, is bringing your mistress to your father-in-law's charity gala and believing no one would notice. 600 heads turned. 600 pairs of eyes found Paige Sutton at her table in a red dress. She sat perfectly still, a photograph of herself, wine glass trembling in her hand. Richard turned to face Mason directly. You married my daughter and believed you married her money. You were wrong. Nora's worth has nothing to do with me. She built this foundation's arts program from a blank sheet of paper into a program serving 3,800 children. She raised $534,000 for arts access and literacy last year. She is carrying your daughter and fighting for her future while you plot to steal both. He paused. Let the silence do its work. Nora Calloway is the most valuable person in this room, and you, Mason, are the only worthless thing at this table. 600 people did not breathe. Mason looked around the ballroom, searching, desperate for a face that might be on his side, a sympathetic angle, anyone. He found nothing but the reflected light of his own exposure. He straightened his tie, a reflex. The gesture of a man who has lost everything and reaches for the only thing he can still adjust. This is you can't just... The service door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, unhurried and professional. Mason Reed Holt. The voice was calm, final. I'm United States Marshal Lawrence Briggs. I'm serving you with a petition for divorce, a temporary restraining order, and a federal summons to appear before the district court on charges of forgery and wire fraud. The documents were pressed into Mason's hands. His hands shook so badly the papers rattled audible in the silence. 600 people watched a man's life collapse in real time, the color leaving his face in stages, the papers trembling. Nora didn't stand, didn't speak, didn't look away. She placed both hands on her belly and felt her daughter kick. Strong, steady, as if she knew. Across the room, Paige Sutton was moving toward the exit. Head down, quick steps, red dress disappearing through the crowd. She made it to the lobby doors before Jade stepped into her path. Jade held a glass of champagne and the specific smile that women reserve for very particular circumstances. Going somewhere. Paige opened her mouth. I didn't know he was... You knew, Jade said, simply, factually. You Googled her. You posted photos from their anniversary restaurant. Mrs. Holt by Summer doesn't happen by accident. Paige's chin trembled. Whatever she'd imagined when this began, it wasn't this. It wasn't being identified by name in front of 600 of Nashville's most powerful people. She walked past Jade without another word. The lobby doors closed behind her. Mason was escorted out by the marshal and 2 hotel security officers. He didn't resist. He didn't look for Nora. He walked out with the papers in his hand and the weight of 600 witnesses on his back. The doors closed. Richard returned to the microphone. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, and he smiled. The real smile, warm, unhurried, the smile of a man who has just kept a very long promise to his daughter. "Now, where were we?" He reached into his jacket and set the pocket watch on the podium face up so the room could see it. "Ah, yes. We were raising money for children who need to know their voices matter." The gala continued. The band played. The champagne flowed. The donations came in waves. $3.1 million by the end of the night, the highest total in the foundation's history. Every person in that room, it seemed, wanted to write a check for the man who had just shown them what a father looks like. Nora stepped outside at 9:45. The terrace overlooked the Nashville skyline, the honky-tonk glow of Lower Broadway below the dark band of the Cumberland River, 3 stars barely visible above the light pollution. She breathed. Really breathed. Footsteps. She turned. Seth Wren stood in the terrace doorway holding a glass of water. "Thought you might need this," he said. She took it, drank, felt the cold trace a line through her chest. "Are you okay?" he asked. Nora looked at the city, at the lights stretching in every direction, at the dark spaces between them. "I thought I'd feel triumphant," she said. "I thought I'd feel vindicated." She searched for the word. "I just feel free." Seth nodded. He didn't try to fill the silence, didn't offer comfort or wisdom or a shoulder. He just stood beside her and let the word breathe. "I think I'm going to be okay," Nora said. For the first time in months, she believed it. 1 week later, the porch of her townhouse. October now, the maple in the yard, fully gold leaves drifting down in slow arcs and landing on the walkway in patterns that looked almost intentional, as if the tree were preparing something. Mason was gone. Not metaphorically. Legally. Completely. Court order within 24 hours of the gala. His belongings, the suits, the watches, the cologne that smelled like someone else's story packed by a moving service and sent to a storage unit. The guest room he'd chosen was empty. She'd repainted it soft sage, made it a reading room, hers. Paige had transferred to another office within the week. Turned out Mrs. Holt by Summer has a different timeline when Mrs. Holt doesn't come with a trust fund attached. Mason's firm had let him go within 48 hours of the forgery charges going public. Financial services doesn't keep employees who forge signatures. It's catastrophic for the brand. Randall Price's lending operation was under federal investigation. Daniel had forwarded the forensic accounting to the Financial Crimes Division. 9 other families, 9 other sets of forged documents. Mason was the thread that unraveled the whole thing. The prosecutors Daniel told her were genuinely grateful. This did not help Mason. Nora sipped her tea decaf doctor's orders and watched the leaves fall and felt for the first time in months nothing. Not sadness, not fury, not relief, just nothing. The clean, still nothing that comes after a storm. When the wind finally stops and the world is just wet and quiet and clarified. The doorbell rang. She opened the door. Travis Holt stood on the porch in a clean flannel shirt, the nicest one he owned. She was almost certain. Work boots polished. He held a Tupperware container in one hand and something folded in the other. "Drove 14 hours, he said. "Might have gotten a ticket in Tennessee. Haven't checked. Come in, Travis." He stepped inside, looked around the way a person looks when they're taking something in carefully. He sat at the kitchen table, placed the Tupperware between them. Chicken and dumplings. My mother's recipe. She made it every time something went wrong, when my wife left, when the shop flooded, when Mason broke his collarbone at 12 trying to jump a drainage ditch. He paused. Figured this qualifies. Nora lifted the lid. The smell hit her immediately, rich, warm, the kind of smell that comes not from a recipe, but from a history. From a woman standing at a stove. From decades of simple kindness repeated until it becomes something sacred. And this, Travis said, unfolding what he was holding. A baby blanket. Cream-colored, hand-knitted, slightly uneven in places, soft from years of storage and careful washing. My mother made this for the first grandchild she thought she'd get to meet. She died before that happened. I've kept it in a cedar chest for 23 years. Always meant to pass it along someday. He smoothed the edge of it with one rough thumb. It was always meant for this baby. Mason doesn't get to ruin that too. Nora lifted the blanket, pressed it to her face. Cedar and wool and a grandmother she would never meet, but somehow through this folded square of yarn already knew. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need," Travis said. "You just need to know there's at least one Holt who turned out decent. And your daughter is going to know that." Jade came over on Saturday. They sat on the porch with decaf and a box of pastries from the French bakery on 12th, the kind with custard inside and powdered sugar that ends up on your fingers and your shirt and somehow your cheek. For the first 20 minutes, they didn't talk about any of it. They talked about Jade's cousin's golden retriever who had eaten an entire decorative pillow. They talked about the new restaurant on Gallatin that allegedly seated people according to their Instagram following. They talked about nothing. And it was the best conversation Nora had had in months. Then the silence settled, the natural one, the kind that lands between two people who have something real to say and are gathering the nerve. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen," Nora said. "What you did. The 2 months." Jade set down her coffee. Her hands were steady. Her eyes weren't. "I know. I understand why you did it. I believe you thought you were protecting me. But understanding something isn't the same as trusting someone. And trust is going to take time." Nora looked out at the yard, the maple, the gold. "I'm not ready to call you my best friend again. Not yet. But I'm ready to call you my friend. And I'm ready to see if we can build from there." Jade blinked, pressed her lips together, nodded once. They didn't hug, but Nora pushed the pastry box across the table, and Jade took one, and they sat in the October sun with powdered sugar on their fingers and the maple dropping its leaves around them. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. Monday morning, the foundation office. Charlotte Nora at her desk by 8:30. The literacy reports needed review. The hospital wing proposals needed signatures. The donor newsletter needed editing. Normal work, important work. The kind of work that reminds you your hands were built for building. Seth knocked on her open door at 10 with a cup of tea. "The Children's Hospital Board called. They want to name the new wing. They're asking for your input." "The Calloway family wing," Nora said without hesitating. "Not one person. The whole family, including the newest member." She rested her hand on her belly. Seth smiled. He lingered in the doorway, not awkward, just comfortable. The way someone lingers when they're glad to be exactly where they are. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think there's a person in this city who would use that word to describe you. Not after Saturday night." Nora looked up. His eyes were warm, unguarded. He wasn't performing anything, wasn't managing her, wasn't calculating. He was just a man standing in a doorway telling a woman something true. "Thank you, Seth." He nodded, started to leave, stopped. "The donor newsletter," he said. "Page 4. You misspelled philanthropic. 2 L's. Nora laughed. A real one, deep, sudden, the kind that shakes loose something that's been stuck for months. The sound of it surprised her. It came from somewhere honest and long dormant, and it felt like the first warm day after a very long winter. "I'll fix it," she said. "Already did," Seth said, and walked away. Share this story with a woman who needs to hear it. Someone who's been made to feel small. Someone who's forgotten how strong she is. Wednesday evening, driving home from the foundation. The city was doing its October thing, light going golden in the hour before sunset. Everything amber and warm, the buildings looking like they were lit from inside. She passed the Union Grand Hotel, the Pinnacle Ballroom, the brass doors, the stone facade, the awning with its gold lettering. She glanced at it through the car window and felt nothing but the quiet recognition of a place where something happened. Not a monument to her worst night, not a prison, just a building, a location on a map. She kept driving. The woman who had walked into that ballroom 4 weeks ago wouldn't recognize the woman driving past it now. Same face, same earrings, same diamond studs her mother had fastened that terrible evening, but a different spine, straighter, stronger, made of something that hadn't existed before and couldn't be undone. At home, she went to the nursery. The moon was rising, full fat silver pouring through the curtain and making the pale yellow walls glow like a lantern. She sat in the rocking chair, took the stuffed bear from the changing table, felt the folded letter in its pocket, took it out, opened it. She read it aloud. Not for herself, for the baby. "Dear little one." Her voice was steady and clear. "By the time you read this, you'll know some version of this story. The version I tell you leaves out the worst parts and keeps the best ones. That's not dishonesty. That's motherhood choosing which truths to share and which ones to carry alone until you're strong enough to set them down." The baby shifted, rolled, settled deeper as if leaning in to listen. "Your mother was called worthless by the man who was supposed to love her most, and instead of believing him, she became the most valuable person in her own story." The rocking chair creaked. The mobile turned. Silver stars catching the moonlight. "You come from strong women, little one. Your grandmother Elena, who carries grace like a second skin and never once let anyone define her limits. Your great-grandmother, who walked away from a bad marriage with nothing but her dignity and the courage to start over. And me, your mama, who sat on a cold bathroom floor at a charity gala and decided that the word of one small man would not be the word that followed her home." She paused, touched the blanket Travis had brought, cream-colored, slightly uneven, soft as forgiveness. "You also come from a good man, not your father. Your grandfather, Travis. A man from Kentucky with work boots and a flannel shirt who spent his retirement savings to do the right thing. Who drove 14 hours to bring you a blanket and his mother's recipe and the reminder that decency doesn't come from wealth, it comes from choosing every day to be decent. The blood doesn't make the family. The character does." She folded the letter, tucked it back into the bear's pocket. "That's my wish for you, little one. Not that life won't knock you down, it will. It knocks everyone down. But that when it does, you remember whose daughter you are. Not because of the money, not because of the name, because of the spine. You come from women who transform." She set the bear back on the changing table, facing the crib. "Welcome to the family." The pocket watch sat on the nursery windowsill. Richard had left it there the week before, set it on the sill without explanation while he was helping her hang the last piece of artwork above the bookshelf, a print of a girl reading under a golden tree. When Nora asked about it, he'd smiled. "Every Calloway needs something that keeps time," he said. "Reminds you to be patient. Reminds you that the worst hours end and the best ones are always coming." Nora listened to it now. The tick. Steady, even reliable. The same sound she'd heard on Richard's desk since she was a child, the sound that had counted the seconds while she sat in his leather chair, learning to be the person she was still becoming. The watch ticked. The baby kicked. Nora placed both hands on her belly. Felt the life there, the strength, the movement, the future pressed into a space the size of something miraculous. Getting ready to enter the world. She smiled. Not the smile she'd worn for Mason, the performance, the careful arrangement of features designed to hide what was underneath. This one came from somewhere real, from a place that had been dormant for a long time and was waking up slowly the way everything does after winter. From the place where worth lives, not the kind that's measured in dollars or determined by the words of a man who never deserved to say them. The kind that exists because you decided it does. Because you looked at yourself in a mirror one night, 8 months pregnant and exhausted and more honest than you'd ever been, and you said, "There you are." And you meant it. The watch ticked. Steady, patient, reliable. The baby kicked. Strong, insistent, ready. And Nora Calloway never. Holt never again was worth everything.